As for me, I have cared too much about people and places, cared too hard. It made me as a writer, but it will break me in the end.
Willa Cather wrote some of the most unforgettable fiction of the 20th century. She also wrote thousands of letters. People thought most had been burned. Not so.
I loved reading those letters, and I was amazed. I kept finding more letters.
She was so connected in such an interesting time and place that
yes.
it's really, you're getting a view into a whole world.
The publication of the selected letters of Willa Cather made news across America. In her will, Cather expressly forbid publishing or even quoting from her letters. But Andy Jewell and Janice Stout do not see their book as a betrayal. They were following the lead of Cather's family, who released a flood of letters after keeping them safe for over 60 years. Everyone seemed to feel it was time. Time to meet Willa Cather, the person.
My heart to you always, Willie. Such a ravishing world and such a short life to see it in. Lovingly, Willa. Hastily to catch the mail, yours, Willa Cather.
Yours, Willa Cather, is funded in part by Humanities Nebraska, dedicated to enriching personal and public life by offering opportunities to engage with history and culture.
I always feel like coming to Red Cloud is a real remarkable experience, especially in this house. You know, she filled her work full of memories of this house.
Willa Cather's childhood home in Red Cloud sits on a quiet street, once filled with noise and excitement. Here, Willa Cather wrote her first known letter to a prominent citizen of Red Cloud.
School begins Monday, and I suppose I shall go, though I don't feel buoyant over the prospect. I have grown so attached to my work and place in the office and to my little laboratory and dissecting outfit and my stuffed animals, it is hard for me to leave them. She was 14 when she wrote this letter, and it's to a woman named Helen Stoll. You can tell from the letter that Cather wanted to show off a little bit to her.
Yes.
It was a busy community with lots of people, lots of action, lots of ambition.
We children have a great many picnics, parties, and circuses this summer, and hoping to see you all with us ere another Christmas, I remain your affectionate friend, William Cather. It's very hard to project yourself back in time. I mean, we can read history, we can learn about it, but it's still about it. But then you come here and you feel the slopey floor. She wrote something about the old house with everything slanting and sloping. Well, I can feel that under my feet right now.
And then you go upstairs, you see her room covered with a rose wallpaper, and then you remember the letters where she references to her brother. Remember years ago when we were children and I would read you my poems in the rose bower?
Yes, with its slopey ceiling that you can touch, and that's in some of her writing, you know, a snuggy, close-in ceiling with a window.
And she put some of that feeling, I think, into Thea Kronberg in Song of the Lark, when Thea's staying up late, cold in her room and huddled under the blankets and reading Tolstoy, you know, and trying to get a sense of this bigger world out there that she's going to go after.
First time I saw the Willa Cather Prairie 20 years ago, I came out to a Cather conference as my 30th birthday present to myself. So that was just such a geeky thing to do. But I came out and I went to the Willa Cather Prairie and I thought, okay, I'm going to see the place of my Antonia, which I had read at least 25 times at that point. And I was shocked because it wasn't absolutely flat.
Willa Cather was only 9 years old when she came to Nebraska from Virginia with her family. It was as bare, she said, as a piece of sheet iron. It wasn't literally true. It was a feeling. And in 1912, Cather struggled to express that feeling in a letter to a friend.
The West always paralyzes me a little. When I am away from it, I remember only the tang on the tongue. But when I come back, I always feel a little of the fright I felt when I was a child. I always feel afraid of losing something, and I don't in the least know what it is. It's real enough to make a tightness in my chest, even now. And when I was little, it was even stronger. I used always to be sure that I'd never get out, that I would die in a cornfield. Now I know I will get out again, but I still get attacks of fright.
Well, she could also say the cornfields are beautiful when the wind ripples them. But dying in a cornfield means I will never get to where the markers of high culture are located. I will never get to where things are exciting.
And I think it also means no one will notice when I die.
There you go.
know?
Yeah.
Because you can imagine if she stayed in Red Cloud, she could be the sort of extra maiden aunt who gets to help out with her younger brothers. She could join the club. She could, sew for the altar guild. I don't think so, right? Can you imagine that? That was not going to happen.
And now, as the poor Mexicans say to their sweethearts, may all the gold I have ever dreamed of be yours. Yours, Willa S.C. April 28th, 1925. My dear Mr. Fitzgerald, I had read and hugely enjoyed your book before I got your letter, and I honestly had not thought of a lost lady when I read that passage to which you now call my attention.
In 1925, Willa Cather received a surprising letter from F. Scott Fitzgerald. His novel, The Great Gatsby, had just been published, and he was afraid he had unconsciously stolen his Daisy character from her heroine in A Lost Lady. Cather was famous by then, author of O Pioneers, The Song of the Lark, My Antonia, and she just won the Pulitzer Prize for a war novel. She assured Fitzgerald that he had nothing to worry about. It wasn't plagiarism. They were both responding to the same mysterious thing.
I suppose everybody who has ever been swept away by personal charm tries in some way to express his wonder that the effect is so much greater than the cause. And in the end, we all fall back upon an old device and write about the effect and not the lovely creature who produced it. After all, the only thing one can tell about beauty is just how hard one was hit by it. Isn't that so?
Cather was first hit by it many years before when she met a young woman named Louise Pound at the University of Nebraska.
1:30 p.m., June 15th, 1892, Lincoln. My dear Louise, I am just about halfway through a nasty job of packing, and the idea has suddenly occurred to me that after going up to your place tonight to see your new Worth costume, I did not give voice to my admiration. It rather overcame me. The general effect struck me so hard that I lost track of the incidentals. I find that I have 4 very distinct impressions left with me: the neck, the train, the color, and what the whole affair set off. I suppose you would object to my saying that you looked very handsome last night.
I think she had a very deep crush on Louise Pound, and that letter is one of the primary pieces of evidence that Cather loved women, that she was oriented toward loving other women, not loving men. And she also knew that society judged her, or would judge her, adversely for that. She said, it's so unfair that friendships between women should be labeled unnatural. So she knew what she was talking about.
I think that letter to Louise Pound it's really heartbreaking because you just feel it as an unrequited love. You can feel Louise's distance, or at least Cather's perception of her distance from her.
And I think lots of people have written letters like that. Most of us will never have them published. It's true. I certainly hope that the person to whom I addressed such letters in college didn't keep it.
This epistle is infinitely sillier than one I tore up last March and did not send you, but I am tired and just haven't physical energy enough to tear it, so you will have to pardon my frame of mind and lay it all to the weather. Yours, William.
Louise Pound became a famous athlete and the first woman president of the Modern Language Association. She stayed in Nebraska. Willa Cather pioneered her way east, from Lincoln to Pittsburgh to New York, finding friendship along the way with women who returned her affection.
So this is the house where Willa Cather and Edith Lewis met in 1903. It seems to have been August when they met. And they had a lot of connections before then. A lot of people that they knew each other, but they'd somehow never managed to meet.
It was a life-changing meeting for both of them, as Edith Lewis writes in her biography, Willa Cather Living. She had curling chestnut brown hair done high on her head, but the feature one noticed particularly was her eyes. They were dark blue eyes with dark lashes, and I know no way of describing them except to say that they were the eyes of genius. Edith Lewis of Lincoln, Nebraska, would become Willa Cather's lifelong companion. And it was the daughter of a Pittsburgh judge who became Cather's muse. Cather said she wrote all of her books for Isabel McClung. The two women traveled the world together, and they exchanged hundreds of letters, but only a few postcards remain. When Isabel died, her husband returned Cather's letters, and she burned them in her New York apartment.
I think she was overwhelmed by grief. She knew that a very important aspect of her life had come to a close with Isabel's death, and she was renouncing the past that had been so much to her. It's over, it's gone, and she burns the letters. That is, I think it was the emotional pressure of the moment.
That action, I think, is consistent with Cather's sometimes dramatic character. The symbolism would have appealed to her.
But one of Willa Cather's deepest friendships lives on almost entirely through letters. It's a story of betrayal and reconciliation, with a mysterious gap of 10 years. Scholars had no idea what that meant until someone found a trunk full of letters in a barn.
Dear Dorothy, it's foolish for people who have so much to say to each other not to get into communication with each other, don't you think? I believe we could quite come together again now, and oh, how good that would be for me.
Mark Madigan has put together the pieces of an unusual correspondence between Willa Cather and Dorothy Canfield Fisher. The two women met at the University of Nebraska, and both became famous writers. Ironically, their friendship was almost destroyed by a short story.
Canfield led a remarkable life. She was a popular and prolific writer. She was the mother of 2 children. She had a family life, was married to John Redwood Fisher from 1907 until her death in 1958. She was involved in charitable causes.
In 1993, Mark Madigan published Selected Letters of Dorothy Canfield Fisher. The book features letters Fisher wrote to Cather during a difficult time in their friendship. The letters that had been found hidden away in a barn. And later, when the letters from Willa Cather's extended family came flooding into the University of Nebraska-Lincoln archives,
Hey, Andy, good to see you.
the pieces of the puzzle began to come together.
All these materials, these couple of postcards and 400 more, I was here the day they were brought in. They came in through the doors of the archives with duffel bags full of letters, and everybody around was tearing up. And we opened up, we did not know what they would be at all. We opened it up, and here they were, letter after letter of these wonderful things. I mean, some of my very favorite letters I've read of Cather's came in that day. When the collection first arrived, there was a student who was down here taking photographs for the university, and he said as a joke, "Oh, I didn't know she wrote in Arabic," because he just couldn't read a word of what she said.
Right.
In 1902, Willa Cather went to Europe for the first time and met up with Dorothy Canfield, who was studying at the Sorbonne. While they were there, Canfield introduced Cather to a friend of hers who always insisted on being photographed on her right side. Her unusual appearance gave Cather an idea for a short story she called The Profile.
Evelyn Osborne had a disfiguring scar on the left side of her face that was caused by a burn, just like the protagonist of The Profile. And when Dorothy Canfield learned about this story, she knew that her friend, Evelyn Osborne, would be severely impacted emotionally by the publication of the story, and that she would recognize herself in Cather's character.
And Dorothy said, this is unethical. It will hurt her feelings. It will be devastating for her. Don't publish it. And Cather published it anyway.
Cather was driven and she was ambitious. And she had a tremendous ability to focus on what she needed to do to succeed as a writer, to make it in the literary world. And it was so important for her to succeed and to have that story in her first published volume of fiction, that she was willing to risk her friendship with Dorothy Canfield.
Evelyn Osborne died before The Profile was published in McClure's in 1907, but for years, Willa Cather and Dorothy Canfield barely communicated. It would take a war to get them started again.
About a week after I sent my stories to S.S. McClure, he telegraphed me to go to New York at once. I go about with care because I have become so much more valuable to myself. At 10 o'clock last Friday, I was not much afraid of streetcar accidents and things, but when I left the office at 1, I had become more saving.
Willa Cather's short stories led directly to her first important job, working for the influential publisher S.S. McClure. It was 1906. 5 years later, she had worked her way to the top as editor of McClure's magazine. But the thrill was gone. She shared her frustration with the writer Sarah Orne Jewett in a letter full of startling images.
My dear, dear Miss Jewett, I live just about as much during the day as a trapeze performer does when he is on the bars. It's catch the right bar at the right minute or into the net you go. I feel deluded and weakened by it all the time. Relaxed, as if I had lived in a tepid bath until I shrink from either heat or cold. Of course there are interesting people and interesting things in the day's work, but it's all like going around the world in a railway train and never getting off to see anything closer.
She's saying, I feel frustrated that I can't write and I don't have any power to write. And then she says, look at my metaphors. Look at me writing. Look at me writing up a storm, right? I mean, the letter itself is just a bravura literary performance.
Mr. McClure tells me that he does not think I will ever be able to do much at writing stories, that I'm a good executive, and I had better let it go at that. I sometimes, indeed I very often, think that he is right.
Isn't that devastating? Isn't that devastating? She admired S.S. McClure so much, and he knew it. And when I see her report that he said that to her, I can't like him very much anymore. You know, that was really trying to make sure she stayed on as his valuable and useful editor and didn't go off pursuing the things she wanted to do.
Sarah Orne Jewett advised Cather to find her own quiet center and write from there. In time, Willa Cather did exactly that. She took a leave from McClure's and returned to the open spaces of the American West.
And that is the moment that she switches gears from being a talented but somewhat imitative writer to writing O Pioneers, then Song of the Lark, the My Antonia, the stuff that she became famous for. And it's then that she reports in those letters that she's seen the great wheat harvest, that she is in the Bohemian country. And I think that's when she realizes, this could make great art. You know, this is worth telling about, and I know something about it.
There were long years when I loved you very, very dearly, you know. And when one is older, that comes back, with a difference. And the new people can't mean as much.
Well, it was a story that broke them apart, the profile. And it was a novel, one of ours, that brought them back together.
For over 10 years, Willa Cather and Dorothy Canfield barely communicated. What broke the ice was a novel inspired by Cather's cousin, G.P. Cather. Like G.P., the book's main character, Claude, is a Nebraska farm boy who goes off to war.
Dear Dorothy, yes, it will be classed as a war story, which means it will sell about 12,000. And God knows I never wanted to write a war story. I lost 6 months refraining from putting pen to paper on this one, but it stood between me and anything else. Some of me was buried with him in France, and some of him was left alive in me.
She talks about the character of Claude Wheeler as if he's a ghost, literally, in her life. She describes in that kind of visual language a psychological relationship with the characters in that book that's really remarkable. And I think it's important that she's writing this to another writer.
Cather asked Dorothy Canfield if she would read the page proofs of one of ours, paying particular attention to the scenes that were set in France. Canfield had been on the front line in France during World War I, establishing a Braille press and a children's hospital. When her old friend agreed, Cather was overjoyed.
You can feel in those letters when she reaches out kind of cautiously to Dorothy. And Dorothy, we don't have her reply, but she must have been quite generous with Cather. And Cather, just like the floodgates open.
I feel as if you'd sort of rescued Claude, Dorothy, as if you'd snatched him up when he fell and borne him off through the fray. So lovingly, Willa.
One of ours won the Pulitzer Prize in 1923, and the correspondence between the two old friends continued for the rest of Cather's life. One of the very last letters Willa Cather received before her death in April 1947 was from Dorothy Canfield Fisher. In it, Fisher recalls their first visit to Europe in 1902, when a new century was just beginning and the possibilities seemed endless. Willa Cather is buried in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, near the Shattuck Inn, where she loved to work, and where one evening in the fall of 1936, she wrote a letter to her lifelong companion, Edith Lewis, who had stayed behind in New York City.
Sunday, 4:30 p.m., Shattuck Inn, Jaffrey, New Hampshire. My darling Edith, I am sitting in your room, looking out on the woods you know so well. So far, everything delights me. I am ashamed of my appetite for food. And as for sleep, I had forgotten that sleeping can be an active and very strong physical pleasure. It can. 1 hour from now, out of your window, I shall see a sight unparalleled. Jupiter and Venus both shining in the golden rosy sky and both in the west. I can't but believe that all that majesty and all that beauty, those faded and unfailing appearances and exits, are something more than mathematics and horrible temperatures. If they are not, then we are the only wonderful things, because we can wonder. By next week, it will probably be colder. Everything you packed carried wonderfully, not a wrinkle. And now I must dress to receive the planets, dear, as I won't wish to take the time after they appear, and they will not wait for anybody. Lovingly, W.
Yours, Willa Cather, is funded in part by Humanities Nebraska, dedicated to enriching personal and public life by offering opportunities to engage with history and culture.